Are people
Okay.
going to see this part?
Probably not. I'm assuming I can edit out nose picking.
The
But
nose picking?
Google has a filter for that.
I just picked my nose and now it actually itches, but whatever. Go ahead.
It's like when you're not allowed to touch your eyes. Just all of a sudden, my eye itches so bad. If I have something spicy on my fingers, I'm
Yep.
like, I can't keep my fingers out of my eyes right now. I'm going to kick this off by saying just what started this conversation is, so with Project Agitare, or Agitare as we're calling it now, rebrand, we are, I'm trying to make sure we have conversations about all of our upcoming facilitated sessions. For people who aren't, they're like new to the facilitation game. They've been through whatever. They've been through Warfighter-Centered Design, or they've been through Think Wrong or something, and they don't necessarily know how to get started, right? And so I want to get them in the mindset of, oh, here's just a starting point. You have a blank slate, or you just have a problem set. Here's kind of how you get started. So I like to kick these conversations off, and I did this on Slack, on where we do most of our chatting around Agitare. And I said, hey, I've got an upcoming session, and how would you guys do it, just to get people talking? And then we, our marketing manager, Jordan, posted it on LinkedIn, and I tagged you to provide some input because I know you're a master facilitator, and that's how you came into it. So why don't you introduce yourself really quick so that people know who the hell this guy is?
My name is John. I'm 6'1". I live in the 757 area code. I have a German Shepherd dog, a 3-year-old daughter, and my wife has me of, is it 7 years? I think. I am a design thinking guy. I'm a facilitator. I'm a Lego, Disney, Luma, Think Wrong, like right tool for the right job type of guy. And I like to laugh and have fun.
Yeah, you're like
the, or is this awkward now?
No, I mean, it's gonna be awkward the whole time. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with me. It's always awkward.
Oh, I love it. This is great.
I'm like, it's gonna turn out that I was an alien all along, and just somebody convinced me I was human. They were like, and so I've just been trying to figure out why it doesn't quite fit. I'm like, I think, is this how conversations happen?
I love it.
You just kind of have to lean into it.
Yep.
So, yeah, so we've had a lot of conversations over the past. I mean, you were very helpful in helping me formulate what we wanted to do with Agitare pretty early on. So I've been kind of grabbing your coattails regularly to see what you thought about different things. And so I thought that this would be a cool opportunity to get into the weeds with you about specifically how you plan a facilitation experience.
Yeah. Is that a question? You want me to start talking?
That wasn't a question, but you can treat anything I say like it was a question.
Yeah. All right, I will. I'll give you my baseline for what I do when I plan a workshop, and then see where that goes.
Sure.
I think all workshops have anywhere from 3 to 5 things not in common that are something that you absolutely need to know. It's who's going to be there, how many of them are going to be there, what does the venue look like, and how long do I have to be able to achieve some desired outcome. So if you added that up, I don't know what you call as a number, but there's, I don't know, 3, 5, 6 different things that you want to know right away. And the thing that I focus most of my efforts on are, what is the outcome? And the best question I think that you could ever ask is, we just had the most successful offsite that we've ever had. It's a raging success. Everyone is super pumped and excited about it. We're still 2 months away from the happening, and people are still excited and talking about it. Why was it successful? And then I go down that line of questioning and pull out all the nuggets that someone says, hey, this was successful because, the person that rarely gets to speak had a voice and people listened. This was successful because we created emotional connection with people that we didn't think that we had. this was six, and then they go down that list,
Yep.
and then I go, okay, well, now let's work backwards from that to make sure that the reason you thought it was successful is actually why it is. I think most people take the opportunity statement or the challenge or the sticking point that we have for the purpose of the offsite, and they make that their focal point. And I strongly recommend going the other way and realizing that you could determine in the span of a workshop that the problem they're attempting to solve is not necessarily the root cause of what they're going after. So I always start with that.
That's really interesting. I know that you're a mentor on the Summer of Design with me right now. And one of the things that I'm really excited about that at the moment, because it's Darden School of Business's approach to design thinking, is because Karen Petty-Hold and Jean Lidka have an evolving kind of an up and coming book, which is going to talk about this new aspect of design thinking, which includes the experiencing and becoming phases, which I feel like I wanted to be an aspect of Agitare specifically, because what you just said, that whole, it's not about, if you focus too much on the outputs, then you're just creating like this calculating process, right? Whereas if you focus on the experience that you want people to have, more magical things end up happening. Which I think a lot of facilitators kind of understand intuitively, but I don't think I've ever read it like articulated in that way before.
Boom. Well, you said it. I didn't say it.
I mean, you kind of said it first, though. I just said it differently. This is how being a writer is.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's great.
Yeah. So
yeah. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So I also think if you add on to it and you kind of go down a little bit more in the rabbit hole, there's an element, and this actually ties into Summer of Design as well. There's an element of discovery that I think a lot of people forget. And it doesn't have to be super in-depth in the weeds. It doesn't have to be this massive project. It can be as simple as just asking a few really pointed questions to specific people. And the reason I say specific is because, I mean, you could shoot out an email to 300 people and get some data back, but chances are, in my experience, only 40 to 70% of those people are actually going to reply, and those are on the extremes, not necessarily the core. And if you can pointedly say, hey, Sharon, hey, Susan, hey, Frank, hey, Bob, like, what do you think about X? And is there anybody that you think might think differently than you? Can you put me in touch with them? Like 1 hour of your time, call a couple people, ask a couple questions. And then that discovery really, when paired with the first question I asked, which was, we had a successful event, why? I think you can pretty much create any kind of scenario that achieves those desired effects, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. We actually had a cool moment in our most recent Discovery 101 course. It was this last Saturday, I think. I don't know. I've lost, time moves differently in the COVID era, so it could have been a month ago. But we had this moment where Jer McCoy and I were discussing kind of out loud what was happening with an exercise. It was like we're walking them through how these exercises are supposed to go, right? And we're using a real problem statement. And sometimes I've had this experience, sometimes it just isn't working. Like what people are doing with the sticky notes, it just doesn't make any sense. And my instinct as a facilitator has always been to like panic, and like part of me really wants to, we got to rush to the next thing until things start making sense. But I've seen the most success happen when I stepped outside the exercise and it facilitated a conversation where I was like, why isn't this working? Like what about this are we struggling with? Because clearly we're not all on the same page, either about the instructions or about how we're even viewing the problem right now. And then you end up with these weird serendipitous moments. And I think that's the ideal of what you want to get to, are these weird insights. It's not actually about, like, like I said, the calculating machine of exercises.
For sure. So I think in that scenario, to give you a kind of what I do in those scenarios is, if something is failing absolutely miserable, you have to take into account that everyone is looking at you. They're trying to figure out, like, is this person freaking out? And if so, like, what did we get ourselves into? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Or is there some kind of method to this madness? Like, there's a lot of curiosity around failure in that sense. So what I do is I act even more confident. It sounds very odd, but I act very, very confident. I allow it to fail a little bit more until the point of pure awkwardness. And then I pause it. And then I just ask the question, what do you guys think so far? Knowing that it's going to allow them to kind of get some stuff off their chest. This makes no sense to me. I don't understand why we did it this way. And, you said blah, blah, blah. And then I take all that and say, I totally agree with you, 100%. And then what I'll do is I'll throw in a couple extra things that maybe they didn't think about of why it's not working. Never an excuse, but more just to kind of build out the scenario. And then I kind of turn it into a vulnerability moment where I go, hey, this is what I intended to happen. In the past, this is what has happened. Here are the impacts that we've achieved doing X, Y, and Z, but I've noticed it didn't work because of LMNOP. So we're gonna transition to the next thing. I just want to be open and upfront, transparent with you guys, and blah blah. And again, in my experience, I think people take to that a lot more. They recognize, like, you're not just going to brush over and say, okay, we're moving on to the next thing, and that was a failure. We're not going to admit to it, and then they treat you more like a human. So the next time you ask them to hit the I believe button, chances are they're willing to do it.
I think there's also something there where people get the sense that, like they're used to processes that aren't complex. They're used to processes that are just, here's the path, walk the path, do the steps, and you're gonna get a predictable outcome. Whereas what a facilitation of like a workshop like this is a complex process, which means that you can't actually predict what the outcome's gonna be. We're all kind of here to figure that out together. And
Yep.
I think there are moments, and like having those conversations might be one of them, where you're like, hey, this isn't working. Hey, I got an idea. Let's try this other thing. I love doing those pivots in the middle of workshops where I'm like, I have a weird idea that I'm going to see something if I throw this exercise in right now. And then when people kind of hear that we're all kind of experimenting together, they kind of get on board
Yep.
with, oh, wait, well, one, this guy knows how to improvise with, so he clearly kind of knows what's going on if he can just throw stuff into the mix. But also, I need to put more of myself into this because I'm not going to be handheld.
Absolutely, definitely. And I've always had. I think a lot of facilitators have a different ratio of new to old type of stuff, but I've always had this 10% mentality. Um, Everything that you do, although every outcome, the audience, the seniority of the people in the room, the problem stigma, all these things make it, like you said, very complex, and it's always different. Even if you do use a very similar workshop, I attempt to do at least 10% of something new every single time. Even if it's
Hmm.
me testing a new thing or testing an old module with a new way of doing it or a new set of instructions or something like that. But the caveat to that is, and I've done a lot of experimentation with that, is that if you start that 10% too soon, you don't necessarily get the buy-in of the people, and you need
Yeah.
that buy-in to carry through some of your valleys, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I almost always do something that I have tried 1,000 different ways from Sunday that I know is going to work. People are excited about it, and then I'll move on into something that I have no clue.
That
And then
reminds me,
yeah,
yeah. That reminds me of how I like can't help but start with something like Deflection Point or the Mountain from Ka is an example of that, where it's just like a very or icebreakers. Icebreakers, you basically know what's gonna, or at least if it goes weird, it's kind of supposed to go weird, right? So
yep,
it's not like high risk, um, but yeah, Deflection Point is a perfect example of that for me because from Think Wrong, it's this just tone setting. It gets people moving and putting ideas out there, and they start really, very reserved, and then they kind of open up as they need to fill out the board, and it's a really easy opener. It kind of annoys me how often I revert back to that. But at the same time, I think it comes from that place that you just said, where starting with something that you know is going to work, it you need people to be with you on the same
For
page
sure.
as we're going on this journey together.
Well, so there's
Um,
an addition to
yeah,
that. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. No,
So, in addition to that, I don't think it's necessarily about uh, that workshop or that module in the light of how you're talking about it. I think it's more of how can you get the confidence that you need? How can you get the tempo where you need it? How can you get the energy where it needs to go so that all follow on things fall into place? So it's not necessarily about doing something that you know will work, but doing something that you know will hit those wickets the way you want them to.
yeah,
I mean, I've done workshops before where the first thing that I've done, I've called on a volunteer that refused to be a volunteer. So you go, okay, so do I force them to do it? And now I've lost them entirely and maybe a couple other
hmm
people. Do I back off and now I've lost my credibility for the rest of the day that I've called on somebody and now I'm not going to follow through? Like that's a big thing to come back from. And I have I mean, I love this analogy, and people that have been with me have heard me say this 1,000 times, but it is the penguin, the whole penguin thing. You know, penguins push each other to the edge of an iceberg and they wait until one of them falls in and then they all stop. They look down, and if there's no blood in the water, then they all just jump in.
yeah,
Um, which basically means the first one accidentally fell off. There are no seals in the water, which means the penguin is alive and splashing around and having fun. We can all jump in now. And what that means to me is the area is safe. We've gotten some people that have said some pretty polarizing viewpoints in the mountain or in Deflection Point, and nobody got eaten by a seal. Nobody came up with an argument.
yeah,
Nobody, X, Y, and Z. And the last thing I'll say on that is you can run that exercise very poorly. If you don't
yeah.
keep people going and you don't keep the tempo up and you don't make it go quickly, you can fail very, very hard on a otherwise very easy module. So something to think about if you're just gonna take directions off of a piece of paper and try it for the first time. There's a lot more to it than just execution.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And also it depends on what problem set and how and what kind of crowd you're dealing with. We're lucky with a lot of the things that we're doing because it's something like we're training people in Discovery 101. We got people who are willing to show up on a Saturday and give their own free time. This is an easy crowd. Like they're
For sure.
here to lap it up. So it's a whole other game when we're talking about kind of what I brought you in to talk about, which is a 1 hour set. They're giving me 1 hour of their time, which is not, I don't like that amount of time. I like to have more time than that usually. Just because sometimes it takes sometimes it takes over an hour before people are warm and or before they have bought into the process and they're starting to really open up. But yeah, so what I've got in front of me, and the thing that I asked in the Slack channel and that we had posted on LinkedIn for inputs was we have about an hour with senior enlisted leaders from the unit, but most specifically, I think it might start with just my flight. And it's going to be like maybe 5 people, and their goal, and maybe 5 to 10, but their goal is going to be to try and find opportunities for these senior enlisted leaders to make an impact on the unit or the community. But their secret goal is going to be to make their EPRs better, right? Because that's a lot on a lot of people, military people's minds. They're thinking, I want to do something that's going to be worth my time, but really, I'm worried about my upcoming my enlisted performance report, and I need to have some bullets on that thing. So what I need them to come up with are things that have an impact, that they're going to feel like is going to be worth their time, but is also going to give other people the impression that their time was well spent. So it has that performative aspect to it, right? Like so many of the things we volunteer to do in the military, right?
For sure. I was just writing down a bunch of notes. I'm ready to go. I don't know
Cool.
if you.
Yeah, let's do this.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing that I just wrote down was, and this is my take. So if you're listening to this, this is because it's my personality for something that I know works or doesn't work. So if this is a polarizing viewpoint, I'm happy to have a discussion with anybody that would like to, that disagrees with me. But I'm going to say this as a fact, for what I'm about to go through, and we'll take it as it goes.
Sure.
I believe that in a 1 hour session with 5 to 10 people, the odds of you getting everybody on board, if they're not all showing up in a volunteer fashion on a Saturday, is few and far between. And so what you're searching for is not full buy-in. So now you need to shift gears from buy-in, what you typically do in a workshop, and now throw that out the window. You don't care about buy-in. You care about one of two things: taking the person that didn't believe this was going to work and turning them into a believer, or taking somebody that was curious and making them excited to go share it. So one is either the cancerous person is, that usually spews negativity, is going around spreading this positive message. So that's a huge win. And I would argue a bigger one than the person that's a type A personality that always tells people of these great things. So in a group of 5 people, I'm going for 2 or 3. 3 is like the sweet spot, knowing that a couple of them just aren't going to come along, and I'm not going to waste my time on it because that's not my overall goal. I would argue that your goal in 1 hour is to create so much excitement between these 2 to 3 people that this lives no matter what you do. You finish and they go, "This was amazing. I'm excited. I'm curious. I want to know more. How do you give me more?" And now what they're going to do is they're going to bring in those people that are Saturday volunteers type of people to kind of peel the onion back further. So there was a reason that I created the mountain the way that I did from deflection point, because I went to think wrong, and I think it's a great exercise, deflection point. But there are 2 extra steps, or 3, 2 or 3 extra steps in deflection point that we removed to kind of get immediate buy-in. So you can do the mountain for 5 people, 10 people in a matter of, if you push it pretty quick and it's virtual, you can do that in 15 minutes or less. Yeah. And if you really, really push it, you could do it in 10 to 12 minutes and get it up there super, super quick, knowing that you can't have individual people say what they're saying in front of a classroom like you normally would do. So there's some tweaking there. But I think, well, I'll pause there. I don't know if you agree with those things or not, but those are the initial thoughts that I had on this. There's a lot of random ideas on this square piece of paper.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the question of like what the point is, obviously, like you mentioned, it's the first thing. Like, why are we even doing this? What's the outcome that we're hoping for? And obviously, there are a couple of layers of desired outputs for this. One of them is my desire to validate these methods for these people. One of the missions of Agitare is to promote and make people understand that these are valid and valuable ways of approaching problem solving or problem scoping. So that's definitely a goal of mine, but the goal for them is going to be to have actionable, specific things that they're going to have buy-in on, right? So you're saying that maybe with 5 people, we could hope to have 2 or 3 people have buy-in on the outcomes, on the final outputs of what we come up with at the end, or are you saying buy-in to the process at all?
I'm actually taking a bigger step back from all of that and making that my minimum as a facilitator. So in a typical workshop, if you see somebody that is either too slow or they're not in flow or they don't have, they don't seem to be with it, typically you rearrange other modules or your time to kind of shepherd them a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying the mentality that you have in doing 5 or 10 people for only 1 hour is focus on the win, which is 2 to 3 people. Yeah. If you stray too far, you're going to lose those core 2-3 people that matter the most. So some things you're going to have to brush over where a 2-hour session you might not have to. So I'm not necessarily, getting in a micro level of actually saying a hard and fast 60% of them need to be bought in. I'm saying it's the mentality of the facilitator.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And you would suggest starting with specifically the mountain. It hadn't actually occurred. I had never got into the weeds of specifically why the mountain didn't include those aspects of deflection point. So that's kind of a cool gee whiz for me. Can you go a little more in depth on like why what you were seeing with deflection point that that you wanted to make accomplish with the mountain?
Sure. So I believe there are aspects of it that, I believe everything's like a bell curve, right? And the mountain is just enough time for buy-in, but doesn't let you go so far in the weeds that you lose people and remove that 80% of the middle of the curve. It's just enough to get a lot of data, prove that quantity over quality is valuable, let everybody kind of stand up, move around, et cetera, or virtually move some stuff around and learn the tool a little bit better. And then those second and third aspects of deflection point can be done after you have the buy-in, after they understand the methods. I typically use the mountain in order to show what diversion and conversion is, but they've already now done it. So now it's like it helps follow on things. So to answer the other question of like, what do you start with? I think obviously this depends on your personality. I'll give you a scenario or two. I usually start by doing something that has nothing to do with why we're there. It's not me talking about me, and there's no real outcome whatsoever except for something fun, engaging. And it's either really, really awkward or enough where you kind of go, why are we here? And that's when I jump in and go, you're probably wondering why we're here or why we even did that. And then I walk them through the path of, hey, sometimes you need a little bit of mental sherbet, which is, instead of cleansing the palate before having another meal, it's cleansing the mind before we get going. Like, I need you to know that, I want you to be ready, fresh, and ready to move out. It's kind of sharpening the axe before cutting down the tree type of thing. And then what I'll do is, instead of giving an introduction on who I am, I have never in my life been to an event where somebody tells me who they are and I am overwhelmed with their story. Chances are I already looked up their bio and I'm already impressed, which is why I'm there in the first place. So my introduction is almost nothing. My instructions for the day, I almost never go over 3. I say we're going to start on time, we're going to end on time, we're going to eat lunch on time. But if this is virtual, we're going to end on time, and here's what we're going to accomplish. So now, instead of wasting, 15 minutes of an hour, you can be 3 minutes in, plus starting 2 minutes late. So you can be 5 minutes in, have the proper scene setting, make sure people have enough buy-in to you and they're not like, why is this guy here? Then I would do the mountain. And so with 2/3 remaining in the workshop, you've already done the scene setting. You've already had everything in place. They already know what the outcomes are. And then they do that and you have some data to pull from it. So your job is not over after the workshop's over. You can go back and pull nuggets out of that to constantly feed them, positive aspects of what they did.
And is that the start of, I know you've mentioned doing pre-work before, especially with like a short session, right? Is that, we could talk pre-work or we could talk starting with the, just the data from the mountain, because I do have the opportunity to pre-poll, but I sometimes personally, I have a hard time knowing whether to just present that information to them at the start and then have them regenerate like in an exercise like the mountain, or what to even do. So do you have thoughts on pre-work for specifically this type of session?
Yeah. So this kind of brings me back to when I was, we had different phases of bringing out Illuminate in the Navy. And this to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I have the wrong viewpoint here on what you're attempting to accomplish, but this is like an all or nothing thing. Like, you don't want to do this 1 hour session and have 5 to 10 people turn away and go, wow, I wasted my time. I don't want to do that. Because now they're going to tell other people and you're never going to be able to pick it back up again. So in my in, you throw everything you've got at this session. You make sure it's successful because you bring on other people that make sure the technology doesn't fail and they're answering questions in the background. You make sure you have a redundant host so that if your internet drops, nothing weird happens on the other end. You make sure other people know what your agenda is so that if you do drop out, Murphy's Law, it will happen when it shouldn't, type of thing. And you throw it at it. So yes, I would say pre-work, even if it just sounds terrible to do for an hour session, I would do it, no question.
Yeah.
And what I would do is I would do all of the grunt work for that pre-work. So have them throw a bunch of data at you. You take the data and walk through how it gets organized. If you want a really cool way of doing it, maybe physically write all of the feedback on sticky notes, film yourself on a wall, show everybody where their ideas were, time lapse it, and show how you moved them around to specific outcomes. Create like a one-pager with that data and information and like a 30-second clip that you can show like how it all transpired.
Yeah.
And within 5 minutes, they are looking at a one-pager, all the data that's already been done for them, and now the buy-in's already there, and they're ready to move on into doing these things on their own. I mean, that's just a random idea. I'm not saying to do that, but
No, for sure. But specifically so let's talk like the from nothing, like they're just expecting right now that we're going to do a 1 hour session. And then what information do I engage in with them before the session? And then how does that tie into stuff we generate during the session?
yeah, I think those are independent. I think
Yeah.
you could solve something for them that has nothing to do with why you're there for the workshop.
Yeah.
That will be valuable in showcasing the tool. And then what you could also do is gauge how long it took and how much you got from how long it took. So now you're sitting there in the beginning of a 1 hour session and you go, hey, we're only here for an hour, but I want to show you what we accomplished in 15 minutes worth of effort because you guys did this pre-work. And then you show that in a minute or two, type of thing. I don't think the outcome is as important as what you can do with it. I mean, I've been asked on the spot to showcase a tool where I've had them do a personal journey, not a professional one. And people's eyes are rolling and they're like, this is dumb, this is stupid. You purposely don't give them enough time to really, truly finish it. You participate yourself. So when you're saying, hey, quantity over quality type of thing, and you ask for 30 things, you make sure you get 30 things in the 3 minutes. Like you just jam it out. And usually the naysayer will have 4 or 5, which is a cool thing because now you can go, how many people got more than 20? And people are raising their hand. And you look around the room or virtually, you look at some of them and they're like, oh, I didn't do so well. I'm like, okay. Well, so I don't know if that made very much sense, but I don't think it has to be anything specific. I mean, you could have them do anything for pre-work. It could be tools that they've used in their personal or professional development. You could rack and stack those into different categories and just showcase, what the tool does.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. All right, so let's get into how you would formulate the session if we've got an hour of time and we are a third of the way through and we used the mountain to get buy-in and to get a bunch of data on the board. Now we got a bunch of stuff on the we're probably going to be using Miro. But we got a bunch of stickies on the Miro or mural board, and I have, another 40 minutes to take them to a set of actionable items that they might personally feel like were worth the time they spent coming up with them.
Sure. Okay. So a couple random thoughts here. And for anybody listening, I think you probably already know this, but I call this brain vomit. None of this is in order of preference. This is just kind of how I'm thinking about it. So I'll hear what I say at the same time you do. If you have 10 people, I would try to break them up into groups of 3 for a couple of reasons. One, if you have a failure of even 2 groups, you still have a success in the entirety by whatever their after action is or whatever they went through. So anytime you do a really large group like that, I don't think it works out as well. It's not as intimate. There's another million reasons why, but I would try to break it up into at least 3 groups for it. It makes me think of the tool itself. So your pre-work could be you opening yourself up for 4 1-hour like office hours where you have a mural board, and their job anytime during these 4 1-hour sessions or 2 or 3, whatever number you want, they have to, prior to attending, a prerequisite of attending is they have to show up for 5 minutes and they have to play in the play area. They have to turn a color sticky note to a different thing. They have to put a picture down. They have to move it from one place to another. They can ask you any questions that they want. And now they know how to use the tool in the playground prior to. Yeah. You could make the pre-work as part of the technology test where they're in their playground, but you ask them a specific question. So the data gets dumped and then you come in and scrape the data afterwards. Okay, so you got two-thirds of the time left. I would say that you're in 3 groups. Obviously, if you have 5 people, see if you can get a 6th so that you could have 2 groups. I would push for that very hard if you could. If not, put all your eggs into the basket and go with 1 group. Make sure it's successful. In my opinion, don't go under 3. I wouldn't. And what I would end up doing is creating. I would already know where I'm kind of going with either the ideas from the mountain. So either that's the status quo or the utopia or the actionable, tangible things that you're going to do in a week, a month, a year, or like whatever that is. Yeah. And I would leverage a couple key categories that they probably won't have the time to really establish on their own. So you could do this on your own prior to, and you could say, hey, I took the data and I broke it down into these categories based on X. Yeah. And really that's an affinity diagram on your part to kind of get those categories. And you have them do, it's one of my favorite tools. It's why I would do this for the 1-hour thing. I would do an impact feasibility matrix per group on what those categories are. And I would allow them to have probably a 5 to 10 minute discussion on where they fell at the conclusion of something like that. So now you have 1/3 of your time left. Everything's been racked and stacked. And you have independent groups that potentially came up with the same solution, which is a huge win, because then you're able to go back and say, hey, you guys didn't have a chance to talk to one another and you came up with the same result. That's obviously a really good one. Or you have 2 independent ones, which is also a win, because now you're showing diversity of thought, et cetera, and you can kind of weave the 2 in. So in the last third, what I would do is one of 2 things. I would either have them complete an executive summary that I've created a template to, where they can divide and conquer it. And I would do it in thirds to make it super easy, so that when they're looking at it, they can go, hey, John's got, section A, somebody's got section B, somebody's got section C. We have 5 minutes to go do this on our own. We'll come back together and fill in the gaps, right, on a Google Doc or something like that. I'd either do that, or I would have them come together and either crowdsource independently or on their own executive summary. So now you're looking at 5 to 10 executive summaries, which is even more data. There isn't a so what yet. So you have to decide, do you want the so what to happen in that hour, or would you rather have the so what come with the work that you're going to put in after the fact? So that's something only you can really answer. Yeah. And then depending on your answer, I could tell you what I think.
I mean, I do often, and maybe it's because I'm still new to this and I'm still, so I often run out of time, because I want to, I always want the exercise. I want to hold people in exercises until I feel like they had the experience they were supposed to in the exercise. So as a result, a lot of times we end up with not getting to the so what. And then I use the after report as my way of kind of taking what they generated and the discussions that happened to kind of break out the so what as I observed and gathered it.
Yeah. So, okay, that brings up another thought. For this specifically, and you have to take in mind everything that I'm saying is only because I'm constrained to an hour. Like,
Yeah.
my advice would not be the same if we had a lot more time. But
Yeah, for sure.
In creating this, I would ask somebody that does not share the same mind that you do on how this stuff works. And I would ask them to do a problem that has nothing to do with, like, do a personal one. That's fine. And walk them through 1 hour and then add about 120%. So add 20% time to whatever it is that they did. And that should be your baseline for what you're attempting to do online. Knowing that the worst case scenario is you're going to get to X no matter what, and you have this much fluff. I usually, this sounds ridiculous, but I usually create, or I used to anyways. I don't necessarily need to anymore, but I have numerous agendas. I have the one agenda that I give the host based on very big, high-level wickets, 100,000-foot view. Then I have my own agenda, which is like what went into that, but minimum. You know, like if you give me 6 hours, I'm going to accomplish this in 4 no matter what, even if it means that I have to stretch that 4 into 6. Then I have another one that's like 8 hours of content for 6 hours. Like, if we're doing so well, what could I pull in the moment to make this even more successful? I think you could create a pathway that gets you to success no matter what. Have some extra stuff just in case it's going very well, so that you create a win no matter what. And you know where you are on the agenda. Obviously, this is electronic. So you're able to look on your computer screen and know exactly where you're at and how well they're doing based on a timetable. And you can coach them based on, if they're behind on this agenda, what does that mean? And what are you going to say? I mean, that's kind of nuking it out a little bit, but I think that it's necessary to get this win here. I mean, an hour is no time whatsoever. Yeah. And the win here is, what are they used to spending their hour on? When they sit around a round table and they have these discussions, like, how much information can they get out in that 1 hour? Well, now you're going to show them that you can get 4 times as much if they just, had the active listening component.
Yeah.
Genuinely shared attributes, passively gave feedback, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that type of, the meta insight is really helpful. And it's something that I really want to help impart to other people who are just getting into the facilitation game, because a lot of times I feel like they walk away with just exercises, and that doesn't give you a real sense of what the value you're producing is. Just filling out a deflection point or a mountain, without understanding what you just did and why it's so much more powerful than what we normally do in conversations, I think leaves people lacking the confidence to really get after these things.
For sure.
So,
and if it's somebody other than you who's listening to this, who really wants to win, has not facilitated very much, and doesn't have really the background here, this sounds crazy and it's a lot of work, but I would do 5 to 10 independent workshops, one-on-one. And the good news there is no one's going to look at you in the virtual world and drop signal from you without hearing about it. You're going to sit through the hour. Chances are what you'll end up doing is you'll hit the third of 10, and you'll kind of get in the groove of how you're doing things and how long things take. And the last 7 will be very successful. You take the data as it comes from each one. You share insights with each of them as it kind of rolls over. And in the end, yes, you just spent 10 hours of your life, but you were able to go a lot faster. You were able to do one-on-one coaching. You were able to get the data that you wanted. It shows that you genuinely care. So that means that you truly believe in the methodology that you're attempting to use. I'm definitely not saying that you should do that. I don't think that you need to, obviously. But if somebody's just listening to this and you're in a similar situation, I don't think that you should feel bad in attempting to do 10 different ones. I think might be a pretty good idea.
I think that's awesome, and I'll tell you, like when we were just when at the 70th wing, when we were just getting started with human-centered design, design thinking, and think wrong, we would basically facilitate exercises for each other every day, and I think it was a lot like that. It was just, hey, I have like this is a stupid little idea that we're trying to hash out. What if we did 2 exercises in a row and see if it works? For rather than having a normal conversation. And usually it did, because there's a reason these exercises are formulated the way they are,
Right.
is because they, like, when you apply these constraints and everybody is bought into the process and they all understand kind of what it's supposed to feel like to participate and the experience they're supposed to be having, it usually works.
Yep.
The real difficulty, and one of the reasons that I'm interested in this meta facilitation aspect of it, is because the real difficulty is take that complexity, which is already complex with buy-in and with everybody already kind of understanding, and then add the layer of, now you've got this herd of people who don't understand the process, who have their own baggage that they're bringing to the exercises, who are going to sometimes intentionally try and drag you backwards in the process, which is a little bit of a trip to try and navigate as a first time facilitator. But yeah, it's why we're doing the whole Agitare thing, is because the meta facilitation and like the understanding some of these techniques, both from like the pre-planning and in the moment ad hoc, like what am I supposed to do here, deer in the headlights moments, I think is really important to help people with.
For sure. And I would actually, so I wasn't sure how you were going to respond to that, so I'll add another element to it. Again, not you, but if it's somebody else listening to this that kind of wants that exposure, I mean, there's a module that I do where you ask a question, and instead of them sharing it out once, you ask them to share it out 5, 6, 7 times and provide feedback along the way, but very quickly. So I'm explaining this in a very short amount of time, so it's not going to make too much sense. But and I do that for 2 reasons. One is you'll find out who is the naysayer in the group prior to engaging. So it's like, if you have somebody do something 3 or 4 times, what they'll start doing is they'll start rolling their eyes. They'll start putting in chat, like, why are we doing this another time? They'll do something that indicates, like, I might be an issue for the remainder of this session, right?
Yeah.
So beautiful. If it happens, at the end of it, you can say why you did it, and you're not calling that person out, but you just sort of called them out. You're like, hey,
Yeah.
I did this as an indicator to me. It only takes me 3 minutes to do it, 4 minutes, whatever. And I wanted to find out who was going to genuinely follow along with me with these things. And now I know who's who in the room. This is great. And then you move on and you know, whatever. But the second reason that I do something like that is exactly like you said, it's the repetition. You have no idea how you're going to act or react when you do a module and something happens too well, which is a weird thing.
Yeah.
It's so good that you don't actually know what to do with it, or so badly. And so the repetition will help. So here's the so what. If you're going to do a technology thing where you're going to teach them what the technology is on the board, right? You might as well do individual sessions prior to, and make the technology session a discovery session that's disguised as the technology session. Get the data from everybody individually. Make sure they know you genuinely care. You're going to gain a lot of credibility with each individual person. Then do the one-on-one or one-on-two type of thing. And yes, it was a lot more work, but in the end, like I said before, it's a total end of the spectrum that people might look at and go, hey, this is ridiculous. Like, why am I putting so much effort into it? But the more effort you put into something like that, the more successful something like that is potentially. You got legs to move on into the next phase after that.
Yeah. I hear you. I think we covered a lot of really good ground here. We're at about like 3 minutes left on our call. I don't want to go over an hour for an in the weeds talk on facilitation. As much as I could just keep going,
For sure.
I really like the idea of doing this, and I might ask you to do it again sometime where we kind of talk specifically about what happens in these sessions and how, I think that there's a lot of repeating pattern impression that if I were to talk to you about, a 3 hour or a 6 hour session, I would hear some similar. It's like fractal, right? It's kind
Oh,
of
for
like
sure.
how you have, you know, divergence and convergence in these very small scales and then at large scales.
Yeah,
But I think it's really good to talk through it, and it's kind of like envisioning possible futures. You gotta
for sure.
sometimes run simulations in your mind. How's this session gonna go? And kind of like you said at the beginning, you were doing like a future casting exercise. What's the outcome that you want people to walk away with? What is that experience of that was an amazing session, and I do that all the time, and that's an exercise that we do as well in certain types of for certain types of outcomes. Have people write like a headline for,
Yeah,
you know Daniel Hulter changes the world. What does the headline say? What's the subtitle of that?
heck yeah,
uh so I find those very useful for when I'm just drawing a blank for what it is I'm going to try and do.
definitely.
Um, I might actually incorporate that kind of thing into what we're doing in our 1 hour session, because I think that it gets people thinking a little more aspirational about, like, oh, we want to have impact. Well, what does it feel like when you've had impact, right?
Yep,
What, like, when people celebrate impact, what is it? What are the words they use? What might they be talking about?
yep,
Um, so I think that some people might find some of the stuff we covered here a little bit ambiguous, but there's a reason for that.
yep,
And the reason is that the specifics look different every time, and there's no, and sometimes you got to feel that out as the data becomes clear. So
definitely.
just with that, do you have any parting thoughts,
Yes,
John?
super quick. I would say exactly off the thread that you just said. A session is dynamic for a reason. Just because you have a plan, just because you've come up with contingencies, doesn't mean you should act rigidly and static throughout. So the advice is only one dimensional until you actually implement it. You got to be able to roll with the punches and think on your feet type of thing. So the more experience you have, the more tools that you have, the better you're going to be able to equip yourself with that dynamic nature. So like you said, if you do roll into a 2 or 3 hour session, you start to add in other elements like icebreakers and breaks and those things and whatnot. There's a lot more to it. We're obviously not going to boil the ocean in a matter of an hour. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you doing this for sure.
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks for taking the time. I rely on people like you to help me get better as I'm trying to use this in more contexts, especially since I now accidentally own a startup that's purporting to help people go on this journey. Really, what that means is that I'm getting them access to people like you, but and Toga and some of our more experienced facilitators. But I'm excited. I think we're already doing some pretty cool things.
Very cool. Well, I'm happy to come on anytime you need it.
All right, man. I hope you have a good week, and I will talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right, later.